Try a business card where you write on the card, I am Jewish, Christian and Muslim, and in addition liberal and Marxist. Write that on your business card. And somebody will call for somebody with a white smock and inject something in you for failing respect for contradictions. The Chinese are benefiting from that. For them to live with a contradiction of giving something for free and at the same time benefiting from it is a small thing. It would open up the world, it would horizontalize South-South. It would make it very easy for a very vulnerable part of Africa to become a confederation, bi-oceanic. If this had existed, the Rwanda genocide would probably not have taken place. Because one formula for genocide, for a big genocide, was that Rwanda was too small. And the logic of a bi-oceanic confederation would be nomadic, would be like Europe, where we Europeans increasingly are nomads again. Let's go to number 2. Inequity, inequality. There is more understanding of economics among the common people in the Occupy movement than you find in the leading universities in the world. When Queen Elizabeth put the question to LSE after having been shown around, and the question was very famous, how come that you, so intelligent people, did not predict the crisis? She drew a non-answer. A profession unable to predict the major calamity is a profession that does not deserve that name. It's a profession in for very serious reformulations. The idea that you can comfort the poor and the miserable with a trickling down effect has been disproven again. And the idea that the sum of 1 zillion egoisms is altruism, if that were true, we would have lived in paradise long time ago. And yet both of these theses are so essential to classical and neoclassical economics. You can say there are variations of it. The Nordic model is different. But what I'm coming to now is the Chinese model. According to the president of the World Bank, something between 300 and 400 million were lifted up from poverty and misery to lower middle class. In the period 1991 to 2004, a period of 14 years, and the Chinese are now working on the next 400 million. I happen to have very good access to very leading levels, and I've seen it as my task to try to answer a very important question that I almost never find asked in the Western mainstream press. How did they do it? How did they do it? That there has been costs, that there have been costs, we know. But how did they do it? So let me just invite you into at least how it has been communicated to me and how I have tried to verify it. Point 1. The unit of development is not an individual nor a country. The Western unit is to give stipends to individuals so they can serve as bridgehead in a developing country, constitute elites in African countries, for instance, and then subsidize a state budget, one way or the other, through programs, so that by means of that there can be a flow of money, and that flow of money is then available for corruption. That corruption I see as basically planned from the beginning. It's not something that just came about, and that it ends up in the pockets of those who have been given stipends before goes without saying. There are brilliant books coming out of Africa, we know the titles of all of them, that show this with some detail. So what's the unit of development according to the Chinese? It's the community, the local community. It could be a federation of neighboring communities. They should not be too big, not too small either. One senses of this some of the logic of the people's communes, where you had in China 70,000 communes. Some of them could be characterized as local federations, with an average of 10,000 inhabitants in each. So 700 million of the Chinese population at that time, that was from 1958 to 1975, they were abolished shortly after the death of Mao Zedong, lived in those communes. One senses going back to the commune. So, point 2, what do? Well, they select the worst off of the communes. They start at the bottom. At the bottom, they introduce micro-enterprises. They should be small companies, not individual persons. These micro-enterprises get a credit, small credit. And their task is to produce for basic needs. That means, concretely in the first run, 5 things. Agricultural cooperatives, with, of course, supplies of clean water. Number 2, textile mills based on local materials for clothing. Number 3, brick mills, bricks of different types, different materials for housing. And one senses in all of that Ashok Khosla, the great Indian, and his initiative for another development. Whether there's been any communication, I don't know. Good ideas have a tendency to come up many places. Then, of course, health. That means polyclinics, simple. It means barefoot doctors who know enough to handle the basic diseases of humankind and enough to know the limits of their knowledge. And education, that means schoolhouses, simple, using local things for education. Who is employed to do this? Those most in need. Those most in need, meaning those who themselves are illiterate, suffer from diseases, from hunger. In other words, that would in the United States today apply to about 16% of the population, about 50 million living in 16 million households, where the food comes from tomorrow is unclear. In other words, it would not be the typical AFL-CIO, if you will, redneck labor. Now, what happens then? Surprisingly quickly, they get their basic needs satisfied. They produce for themselves what they need. Point 2, they're able to pay back the credit by selling basic needs satisfiers at a very affordable price to those not working in the enterprises. Point 3, after some time they have a surplus. What do they do with that surplus? Well, they go to the supermarket and buy more or less brilliant things. Some of them less brilliant, some of them more brilliant. The point is that they enter the capitalist economy. By entering the capitalist economy, they get the wheels turning in what could be stagnant economies. Each single one of the former poor does not have that much to spend, but multiplied by their numbers, it's considerable. What do the Chinese call this system? They call it capi-communism or commu-capitalism. Which one depends on the day, depends on the hour of the day. I've heard both in very quick succession. They say, why do you in the West waste your time in a fruitless debate based on a false dichotomy between capitalism and communism? How about combining them? The best thing about communism is the focus on basic needs. To run a modern economy, they were not good at. The best thing about capitalism is to get the wheels turning. Satisfying basic needs, they're not good at. How about combining it? Well, I mentioned a country where this would be very interesting, United States of America. And I can come back to the gap between North and South. I could say that the gap is, of course, diminishing, not necessarily because South is rising. Some parts are, usually referred to as BRICS, but I do not include India in the growth. In the growth, certainly, but not in the development, given the enormous disparity, some of it hedged around by the caste system, not all of it, and the way in which India is treating what could have been a very fruitful cooperation from below in trying to solve it. I'm not saying that the Naxalite way of communicating that is the ideal one, but that's a question of dialogue, of courage. I notice with interest that not a single leading American politician has had the courage and the wits to go to Occupy Wall Street for a dialogue. It's the economy stupid? It's the politics stupid? No, it's the stupidity stupid. More important than the other two. But leaving that aside, of course, when so many countries in the West are de-developing and some countries in the South are developing, the gap is decreasing. But what the Chinese are saying, if you want countries to grow and develop, for heaven's sake, lift the bottom up. If the bottom 90% of the US population, bottom 90% is an interesting category. Today it is 99%, and God bless him, Paul Krugman says it is 99.9% actually. The bottom 99.9%. Interesting category. But the bottom 90% has $31,000 per year in family income. You don't buy many things with a high value added for that. You buy basics. In other words, you don't get the wheels turning. At the same time as those at the top have more than enough liquidity to waste it on speculation and thereby destroying the economy. If you have a stagnant real economy and a galloping financial economy with an increasing gap, what's your prediction? I'm just amazed how few economists have made that prediction, boasting myself that I have the great advantage of not being an economist. That helps enormously, it seems, because you're not a member of a league with a sworn solidarity. Now, if you now look at this, I think that formula applies to many countries in the West. And there is a new factor coming in here. And it's a factor which may and will lead to basic change and will be the basic carrier of such idea. And the factor is simply the mobilization of people. I think the Occupy movement and the indignant movement, headed by two people, one Frenchman, 94 years old, one Spaniard, 94 years old. I heard some people here were talking about being retired. Fortunately, those are not retired, nor have I any intention to join that club of the retired. So let us just look at it. We'll have big movements that would favor such changes. They will not be headed by economists, and economists will have to rewrite their things. But let us move to number 3.